In the American Wild West in the 1870s, a series of travelers had disappeared. After spending a night with Kate Bender and her family.
The general lawlessness of the frontier made it very possible for the Benders to commit these crimes and get away with it.
The Bender family lived together and killed together.
The dynamics of a crime family are interesting in that being a member of a group committing a crime makes it easier to commit that crime.
Okay, how are we going then?
They're all in it together.
As settlers traveled west to America's new frontier, the Bender family was lying in wait for them.
Their motive for killing people was money. They were careful to kill people who were not from close around, so they would not go missing.
Author Fern Morrow Wood describes the Benders' targets as wealthy outsiders.
They would stop halfway between Fort Scott and Independence and spend the night. And if they appeared to have money, they didn't ever leave.
Ten strangers had already gone missing on the trail that passed the Benders Inn when their next guest arrived. He was a return visitor by the name of Dr. William York. Like many other frontier men, Dr. York was infatuated with Kate Bender.
Well, it's good to see you, William.
It's great to see you, Miss Kate.
You know Irene Powell.
I had heard that.
It's fine.
This would be the doctor's last visit.
High intelligence and great learning. This means your success in the medical field.
Is there anything about a second marriage in there?
Right? No. That's 25. That's small.
But this time, the Bender family had made a mistake.
Dr. York was their undoing because he wasn't from far away, as the others were, and he left behind traces.
After Dr. York disappeared, his brother started searching around and following his trail, and the trail ended at the Benders.
His brother was Colonel York, who had been in the Civil War. He was a Civil War colonel who had recently become a Kansas State senator. And Colonel York was a man of action.
When Colonel York arrived, searching for his missing brother, he came face to face with one of his killers.
The idea that a woman would be involved in conning and luring men to their death, to their murder, clearly points to sociopathy.
Howdy, man. I've been looking for my brother. His name is William York.
Katie probably was a chronic liar by the time she was 5 or 6 years old. That's how she learned to con people.
No, sorry. I've not seen this man around here.
You certain about that?
Kate managed to persuade the colonel to go on his way.
No, I have people traveling through, but no, I've never seen him.
But the Benders realized they were now in danger of being discovered.
I don't think Katie thought she was going to get caught. That's exhibited by the fact that they repeated the same crime over and over and over. But eventually, things got too hot for them and they left.
As far as known, they packed up quickly. They took off. They got into their wagon, and they went up to Thayer, which is only 7 miles away. And they bought train tickets, and they split.
Get out of here!
A few weeks later, already suspicious locals noticed that the Bender's Inn had been abandoned.
So they decided to meet together on the property. The men that went discovered the smell of death, so they started looking. A couple of the men were disgusted, and they got up and sat in their buggy looking against the sun and saw a depression in the grass. The depression was where there were some graves. And they told all the farmers to bring plows and shovels, picks. They started digging, and they found Dr. York's body first.
Jim.
Almost decapitated, because Kate was always given credit for slitting the throats from ear to ear.
The Bender's land concealed a secret graveyard.
They found 11 bodies altogether.
People were furious. They realized that the Benders were behind the missing people, the murders. There were a number of posses, people who were hunting the Benders. They took off in all these different directions. But they were long gone.
To this day, no one knows what became of Kate and her family.
Come on, eat up.
They've gone down in history as America's first family of serial killers.
There's an excellent chance that when the Benders relocated, wherever it was, they resumed the activity. Possibly on a smaller scale to avoid detection. People that do this kind of thing, especially for profit, rarely stop unless they're stopped by the police.
Los Angeles in 1998.
Too late.
Businessman David Kasdan was about to die because he knew too much about a pair of deadly con artists. They were mother and son, Sante and Kenny Kimes.
Sante Kimes is as dangerous a criminal as I have ever come across.
During the 1990s, Sante Kimes traveled across the U.S., leaving a trail of insurance scams, property fraud, and robbery in her wake. She was what was commonly called a grifter.
Grifting is a term for the con, tricking someone into taking something from them. And that was what juiced her up, was the lie, the fraud, the stealing.
At Sante's side throughout her crime spree was her son, Kenny.
It's one thing for a woman to commit a crime, but to involve her children in her crimes is unconscionable, and yet she had no problem doing it.
Kenny Kimes would do anything his mother asked of him, and before long, that included murder.
Hold it down, hold it down.
Among their victims was a banker named Syed Bilal Ahmed.
It's too late, you dog!
In 1996, he'd become suspicious and begun to ask questions about Sante's accounts. His curiosity cost him his life.
Anyone who had something Sante wanted, she would go for. If she could see that she wasn't going to be able to con them out of their property, they were in the most danger, and they ended up in the morgue.
2 years later, in 1998, Sante and her son were in New York City, chasing the biggest target of their criminal career to date.
Irene.
Oh, hello. Nice to see you again.
Their mark was a wealthy socialite named Irene Silverman.
Come in. Would you like a cup of tea?
Sante and Kenny pretended to be business partners who wanted to rent an apartment. But in reality, Mrs. Silverman's new tenants were plotting to take both her property and her life.
Sante's a sociopath to the core. And one of the things that we see in criminal sociopaths is that their criminal behaviors cover a broader spectrum. Sociopath will have a record that includes arson, petty theft, fraud, and sometimes later in their careers, their criminal careers, we see murder. And this is what happened to her.
Kent Walker is Sante Kaim's first son.
She was the most fun, loving, greatest person to be around. She had a charisma, a love of life.
I went to a party at the White House, no less.
She had an ability to take any situation, turn into fun, excitement.
I, of course, was the life of the party, as always.
Growing up, Kent remembers his mother as a glamorous woman. She aspired to the high life and modeled herself on Elizabeth Taylor.
Let's just say I told them my husband was the ambassador of Lithuania.
But there was also a dark side to Sante Kaims.
She was one of the most frightening people you ever want to meet. In terms of evil, I have a couple friends who were pretty high-powered attorneys, very well-renowned, who knows her, and they compared her to Charles Manson.
Mrs. Fletcher, what do you think you're doing? Serving champagne. I told you to serve it during my speech. Does it look like I'm doing a speech?
My mother would turn in an instant.
Get out of my sight. Get out of my sight.
She can, at a drop of a hat, become vicious, angry, controlling, and sometimes violent.
Do you think Elizabeth Taylor had to put up with this?
Her whole life was basically a lie. There would be a little germ of truth, that first germ or seed, but then it would just blossom to this tremendous untruth.
And when Sante was scheming, few around her were safe. She would even threaten her housekeepers and lock them up without pay.
The fact that Sante enslaved women speaks to her sociopathy. She was a user and abuser of people to the core.
In 1985, Sante was arrested for slavery.
In fact, it was the only case last century where someone was convicted of slavery.
By this time, Kent Walker had moved out, and his younger brother, Kenny, was left in a vulnerable position.
The biggest disaster in Kenny's life was when Mom went to jail in the 80s from the Meds trial. At the time, Kenny was at about the worst age you can be for something like that to happen. It kind of gave Kenny a mindset that made him the perfect piece of clay to mold for my mother to use.
As Kenny grew up, his mother began to groom him to join the family business.
The chances of Kenny not falling into a life of crime with his mother were slim to none. The greatest influence on his life was the person that was supposed to love him the most, his mother, who was a criminal to the core.
In Manhattan in 1998, wealthy socialite Irene Silverman was entertaining some new tenants.
Still do all these movements even to this day.
Really?
Oh, yes. Yes, I'll show you.
The ex-ballet dancer owned a $7 million apartment block in the city and had just rented a flat to Sante and Kenny Kimes. She believed the two were business partners. But in fact, they were mother and son con artists who were plotting Mrs. Silverman's downfall.
Sante was dangerous to anyone that had something that she wanted, and if she sensed that that person could be manipulated, she would go for it.
Using forged property deeds, Sante and Kenny planned to take control of Irene Silverman's apartment block.
What are we gonna do?
4th of July, this weekend.
So
everyone's going away on vacation.
They also planned to dispose of Mrs. Silverman.
Yes? What's the matter? Please, come in.
But the Kimes landlady had begun to become suspicious of her two tenants.
What can I do for you? What is it? Well, you're evicted. I'm leaving.
No, we're not. No, we're not. We're not evicted. You're staying right here.
What are you doing? Crazy bitch. Get your hands off.
Just as he'd done before, Kenny followed his mother's orders. First, Irene was immobilized with a stun gun. Then she was strangled to death.
Get the rope.
I think the sick psychodynamic between Sante and Kenny probably increased the intensity of their crimes, and they fed off each other, and clearly Mom was the leader.
She was able to take basic, core, good values that every mother should have for their child and twist it to justify any action she did.
Science doesn't know enough about a sociopathy gene to say that he inherited this from his mother. It also could be that he learned bad behavior from her. Little boys love their mothers. They want to please them. And that is what he did as a big boy.
Sante and Kenny made their escape in broad daylight. Irene Silverman's body has never been found.
I have no doubt that Sante Kimes thought she would never be apprehended. And when that occurred, she never thought she would be convicted.
But just one day later, the FBI arrested the Kimes on an unrelated fraud charge. And in their car, they discovered the deadly con artist's arsenal. Guns, masks, rope, forged property documents, and $30,000 in cash.
Had she not been stopped, she would have been grifting and murdering until the day she died.
In 2000, the mother and son faced trial. They were convicted on 60 criminal counts, from forgery and burglary to murder. Kenny Kimes was sentenced to 120 years in prison. Sante Kimes, 125 years.
I right then had to confront myself with the fact that I then knew that my mother and my brother were murdered. And it was, in a way, a relief because I knew it was over. In a way, it was scary. I was frightened because I knew what was going to be coming. I was very saddened because I knew I'd lost my mother and my brother. Very emotional moment.
Blood ties can be a powerful force for evil. When Barbara Opal said kill, her daughter Heather agreed. Kate Bender lured human prey for her family of killers. And Sante Kimes twisted a son's love to her own murderous ends. For these deadly women, the family that stayed together, killed together. Murder was in their blood.